Hey everyone, it's Dr. Rick. I wanted to talk about protein signaling, a really important concept to understand when it comes to building up muscle, whether it's to get muscular hypertrophy or it's just to get power and strength. There's a difference as far as the exercise, especially you guys who are 40, 50, and 60, because it is hard as hell to get muscle moving. When testosterone leaves, when estrogen leaves, when you're stressed out and have very little sleep, your body is not going to be primed to give you the best results with muscle growth or muscle strength, especially if you invest. I don't care if you invest a ton of exercise, you're doing 2-a-days, or you're in the gym an hour at a time. If there's no hormone available, you will be exercising and moving, and there's great benefit to endorphin and enkephalin and serotonin and dopamine, but your muscle won't have the drive it needs to create protein or muscular synthesis. Protein synthesis is important. And that's why I wanted to talk about a couple of things here. So in the last, say, 5 to 7 years, there's been a movement of paleo, keto, and carnivore. Those of you who are plant-based, I honor that. In fact, I was a vegan for about 2 years, and I had some good results after I figured out how to get past the injury. Yes, I am a muscle guy, so I like resistance exercise. The only problem is that with resistance exercise, you have to maintain that. And I guess even with cardiovascular fitness, whether you're a runner, cyclist, a swimmer, or a long-distance hiker, you also have to maintain that too. But there's something that's nice about muscle. So if you're used to building and moving weights or bands, doing isometrics or just body weight exercises, if you take time off, your muscle still can turn back even with time off. Muscle atrophy can happen, but there's muscle memory that can get kicked back in. Those of you who are runners, if you take too much time off, you really got to start from scratch as far as building up tolerance and endurance and getting to that 4-minute mile or that marathon pace. I really value exercise in any form, whether it's slow exercise in the form of Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, or it's aggressive exercise, CrossFit, or it's just pure resistance and bodybuilding, or it's cardiovascular, like with triathlons or marathons or swimming. All of those things are great. They all will help you get to a ripe old age, hopefully 100, but at least you'll get there without much disease. So if you are unfortunately with disease now, you have to get clearance from your doctor. By the way, this is not meant to be medical advice. So if you're not one of my patients, please click off now. The new data with regards to meat, it's not as harmful as it was thought before. We cannot refute those data from Dean Ornish or T. Colin Campbell. The data from before is mostly gathering data by telephone calls. So there is some inherent error in putting those data sets together and then analyzing the data and coming up with extrapolations on what all that data means. It cannot be ignored though, and I think that altogether, whether it's a Framingham study or any of the big meta-analyses, and if you have disease, if you get on a vegan low-fat diet and you do counseling and exercise and yoga, you can reverse your disease without surgery. But hopefully you can avoid that crap before it happens and start moving and changing life now. If you have disease and you invest in eating pure meat, I think that's fair. But this is not just enjoy bacon, eggs, and steak. It means you really have to get rid of carbohydrates, whittle them down to less than 20 grams a day. And that is tough. So I'm a Filipino by heritage, and a lot of the dishes are combinations of meat, sauce, and rice. A dish like that, when you take away one component like carbohydrate and you just have the meat and the sauce, there's going to be an inherent flavor change. Going to usually be salty because your carbohydrate can soak up a lot of salt and neutralize those flavors. So if you're just going with pure meat, whether it's fish, chicken, beef, pork, egg, you're going to have to change around your cooking style. And if you rely on just buying steaks, that's convenient. But it's getting expensive nowadays since COVID started. Check out the book. I'm not finished with it yet, but one of my patients reminded me. I used to watch Paul Saladino do interviews online, and I think his interview skills are getting better. His concept, it's nice when somebody puts things into an algorithm, and that's what he did with his book. It gives people a template. I will tell you that this is not the first time anybody's come up with just using meat to change the dynamics of disease. We have the Walls protocol. This astute doctor who developed multiple sclerosis had been able to reverse multiple sclerosis by adopting this concept of eating nose to tail. That means taking an entire carcass of an animal and eating everything. When you do that, in theory, these guys reverse disease. And there are some good data sources, so please check out the books. I have a lot of patients that are trying to manipulate and change their ways, especially now. It's like halfway through the summer, and in Chicago, you only got like 2 to 3 months left before it starts getting cold and dark, and we go inside. I take people outside. I go hiking in snow. I have the equipment to do that, so I'm all year round. For those of you who are not ready for that, it's a challenge to exercise all year round. So we're going to have to put our outdoor exercises into hibernation soon and change over to indoor exercises just for the cold months of winter in Chicago. And then during that time, the nutrition's going to change. It's going to be more sweets, more celebration, more feast foods. So I want you to prepare now. This is the time. I know there's barbecue now and there's a lot of festivities and there's alcohol, but if we prepare now, you can go into Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, and New Year's without guilt. Then we can come up the other end into spring of 2023 and be ready to continue making those changes and take advantage of our steamrolling effect. If you're going to choose protein, whether you're a plant-based dieter or an animal-based dieter, do your protein and your macronutrient counting properly. You can do high protein, low carb if you're plant-based. It's just a little bit tougher. There's ways to supplement. This is whey. Usually, if you're going to use protein supplementation to round out your total protein per day, and I honestly like 1 gram per pound of protein. That is at the upper limits. The IOM says 0.8 grams per kilo, and I think that is so underdosing. That's probably just to prevent kwashiorkor or malnutrition. Through the data that's starting to evolve now, Antonio Reyes out of Florida, I think that we can push the envelope, and it serves us because when you're exercising, it's important to supplement after the exercise within 30 minutes to, I think, up to 2 hours with protein. When you exercise, you put a stressor on your muscles, whether it's power and strength or hypertrophy or even endurance. When you put a stressor on muscles, you have to have the building blocks to feed the muscles to recuperate and rebuild. And if you're looking towards hypertrophy, you have 48 to 72 hours to rebuild properly. And you're not supposed to touch those muscles until that time. Otherwise, you abolish and negate the signal. The protein that we use can be either in whole foods or it can be in whole foods plus protein powder. Whey always has more concentrated protein powder than plant-based protein. But I think there's great plant-based proteins out there. I happen to love the taste of Now Sports chocolate. They also have vanilla. Both of these things have stevia leaf extract. It does work to give it flavor, but you have to make your choice and see if the stevia truly affects your gut or not. If it doesn't, I'd say go for it because it's really hard to get 1 gram per pound in every day. Those of you who are also fasting, that will be tough. For example, I'm about 146 pounds. That means I have to get 146 grams of protein every day. I was fasting because I was cutting. That's when you go a little lean or into a calorie deficit to cut fat. This being the last 2 months of summer, now into a bulking phase where I'm going to change around my exercise. I'll start to get muscle hypertrophy, and I'll really try to push as much as possible. So I don't want to fast. I want to have a caloric abundance. And in addition to that, it'll be a lot easier to get the protein requirements in, but I still would push the envelope with protein. Whey typically has more grams per scoop, and it's cheaper. Plant-based, especially pea protein, has less grams per scoop, so I do think that you can put more scoops in, but you're going to go through your container faster. So it will cost you a little bit. If you can get at least 30 grams at a time, all supposedly the gut can handle with 1 meal. Greater than 30, either you're going to have diarrhea or you're going to waste it, because it won't be assimilated properly. It's the other problem is if your gut's not working properly, in addition to pushing caloric abundance, might turn on IBS. So watch yourself and get that taken care of first. Finally, I will tell you that there is another thing that you can do for protein signaling, and that would be arginine ornithine. I'll link a previous video I did on this. So there's many levers to this thing, but the idea is to try to maximize on recuperation, try to maximize on your exercise, and try to feed or match the nutrition that you have to the exercise you're doing. And the exercise is always going to be, what are your goals? Now, no matter what type of exercise you do, endurance, power, strength, or hypertrophy, you're going to trigger a signal, and that's going to be the exercise. That happens instantaneously. And then usually in the next couple hours, you'll have that gene cascade that occurs, tells the body to react or adapt to the type of exercise that you're instilling. If it's endurance, then the gene cascade will take away, not develop any big beefy muscles. It'll be efficient. It'll develop long-lasting muscle. There's a difference between red and white muscle, endurance muscle, and power muscle. You'll also have cardiovascular fitness. When you do power and strength, because of the type of training involved, you will have a different signal, but it'll still turn on the gene cascade, and that lasts for about 4 hours or so. If you happen to be going into hypertrophy, which I think there is usefulness in it, and I know that everybody says, I don't want to get big. I will stress to you, it takes a lot of years to get big. One of the subscribers on my channel had asked, do I see hypertrophy with Carnivore Diet? And just the dieting alone will not obviously induce hypertrophy. You'll have to put the work in. Without getting into the weeds, the objective is to have the building blocks that you need, but also tailor the type of exercise you're choosing for what you want to adapt it to. All exercise results in adaptation. Exercise has very low side effects. Exercise, in some cases, studies out of Australia with Alzheimer's disease actually slows it down and reverses it. That's why I put memory here. If you compare Alzheimer's disease, which is nicknamed type 3 diabetes, exercise versus medicines, it's a head-to-head result that shows it's just as good. If you try to develop an exercise routine in your 70s and you haven't exercised, or you don't know about going to the gym, you don't know about cardiovascular fitness, that's going to be tough. So that's why I always tell my patients that see me, no matter what age, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, it's important to start when you're younger. It's important to start when you see me. Even if you are a couch potato, start. If you have deficiency, fix a deficiency, but don't let that be a hindrance. The longer you wait, the harder it's going to be to start up. All these things will induce a little bit of stress and muscle damage, but that doesn't have to result in you walking around like John Wayne for a couple days. So if you use soreness as a proxy for did you get a good workout, that's fair, but don't do that, because you're going to end up, unless you're very gifted in exercise and you know what to do, you're going to end up injuring yourself. If you have to do an exercise to failure, whether it's endurance and you have knee pain or IT band syndrome from a bad bike setup, or it's foot pain because you ran on a tough surface or you have inferior shoes, or if you did strength and power and you pushed a little bit too hard, you got sloppy. CrossFitters, I love my CrossFitters, but the one caveat with CrossFitting is if you go to fatigue or muscle failure, which you don't have to, but that's usually the end point, you will start to sacrifice your form. When you sacrifice your form and you're moving a lot of weight, high chances for injury. Hypertrophy, typically, you don't have to get big muscle. There's usefulness for hypertrophy. These are the medical diseases that I think help. Specifically, you're probably going to ask me about shrinking and obesity. Obesity is essentially too much body fat, not enough muscle. If you can change that around, develop more muscle, one of those two things usually will go. If you develop more muscle, the body fat will eventually go. Doesn't happen overnight, but you have to kind of work your way this way to get to that endpoint. I'll talk more in the next couple of weeks, so again, if you're not a subscriber, think about hitting the subscribe button and the alert bell to find out when I do these videos for other things, in addition to exercise and fitness for the next couple of weeks. These are just ideas that I give my patients depending on what their goals are. If you have heart disease, high blood pressure, you suffered from a reversible stroke, you have peripheral vascular disease, elevated cholesterol, mood disorder, or diabetes, I think it's important to maybe target endurance. And when you first start out, as I mentioned before, everybody gets newbie gains. No matter what you do, no matter how sloppy you do it, no matter how good you eat, you'll have gains. It could be burning fat. The caveat is this: newbie gains, no matter what, usually taper off after about 2 months. And if you just try to cut back on calories and do a bunch of cardio, you're going to stop the gains stop your improvement. And then usually the reflex is, okay, I'll do more cardio, or I'll chop down my calories even further. That's not what you're supposed to do. That's not sustainable. Doing 3 hours of cardio every day, even if you're retired, impossible. Cutting down to 1,000 calories a day, you're not going to be able to sustain that. The importance is you find a goal or target with your doctor or trainer. After you initiate, you might want to change up and look toward the next goal, especially if you're a newbie. The strength and power, I think, is useful for osteoporosis for sure because of the bone matrix signaling that you get. The muscle pulls on the tendon pulls on the bone gets thicker. So osteoporosis, arthritis, stroke, and memory, Alzheimer's disease, when the cells in the brain respond to insulin, they work better. When the cells in the brain are resistant to insulin, you'll have plaque formation and worsening memory. Grandparenting, I think that if you're taking on the duties of having to lift a little child as they get heavier and heavier and heavier, you're going to be challenged. You can certainly develop just from doing baby lifts, but prepare ahead of time, especially with the carriage strolling, chasing after the baby, bending forward. Even if you don't exercise, you're going to have to get up from a squatting position, pick up a child, clean the floors, get up from lying down. So those are all power and strength. Even if you don't like to exercise and if you've never done it and you're sedentary, you're going to have to engage to this stuff sooner or later. As far as hypertrophy, which is what I like, but it can be useful, especially if you already have muscle shrinking, like you've been put in a cast, you're recovering from a surgery, recovering from COVID, and you have muscle atrophy. Important to do. If you are in your 70s and you're starting off with a very skinny body mass index, like osteoporosis, it's important to try to build muscle. So although it's good to be short and light as far as cholesterol and heart disease, breaking a bone every winter when you sneeze and cough is not a great way to go. And I already mentioned about obesity, changing your body fat composition and muscle composition. So hopefully this gives you a couple of great ideas as far as how to start. But please, you're not on your own. If you're not a patient of mine and you have no guidance from your doctors, please consider seeing me virtually or in person with my herbal411.com website. Bottom line is that I believe you can use exercise, nutrition, and proper sleep with results that will mimic what your doctor is giving you as far as medicines. If you have a disease process and you're on medicines, I think that's fair. Good job. But always work to reverse the disease process and maybe decrease or get off the medicines. Because one thing is for sure, we all age, disease gets worse. So if you do nothing, you will have a compounded problem with the same disease later on that will need more medicines or a surgical intervention. So start now, empower yourself, and find your way. If you have any questions, put them in the comments section down below. Otherwise, I'll see you at the next video.